Hello, everybody. Welcome to June.
Hello.
So actually, one thing we could talk about real briefly at the start is I don't think we settled on a topic for the design meeting this week. I think we don't necessarily have to have one this week. If we want to take a little time to prepare for the next topic, but we could. Looking at our list of things, I see talking about type aliases and bounds, which might be relevant to an upcoming edition if they decide to do anything. There was a little bit of prep required, but not that much. I think unsafe code guidelines, I don't really think we have. It would be useful to talk there. I don't know, but I'm not sure if we want to. Or going over things like copying out of references in safe transmute working group. That's what we kind of have now so far. Does anybody have a meeting they'd like to lead in this meeting? We're pretty sparse attendance, so we could also just move this to Zulip. But I'm somewhat inclined to, if nobody speaks up, I say we skip this week. I wouldn't mind. All right.
It seems, it seems like we primarily just want to go through things as opposed to like things on the lists as opposed to topics. There are a couple items on the nominated list that could use our attention.
Yeah, okay. I'll skip down. Any updates from shepherded items that are worth covering? Inline assembly.
Inline assembly has gone in. It is working correctly. There's a blog post draft up that I posted the PR for, which is waiting for a couple of notable bugs to be fixed, which I believe have actually been fixed at this point. So I think we should run that by Amaniu and see if we're ready to make that post so we can get some widespread testing, because both of the ICEs he was concerned about have been addressed.
Okay. Safe transmute. Nothing new, I'm assuming.
There is actually so there was a crate posted to the ecosystem that is experimenting with some of the traits that have been discussed. And there's some, they're trying to figure out, the people behind that are trying to figure out if that is implementing everything that we need, how that might transition in the future to traits generated by the compiler or similar. And somebody had an experiment in the last week or so that managed to use const generics to almost entirely figure out things like whether a structure has alignment requirements entirely in the type system so that it wouldn't need special compiler support. So there's some feeling like if we fixed things like const generics, then we could do less in the compiler to enable this.
Okay, that's intriguing. How did it do that? I guess they take advantage of the, we don't have to go into too much detail. It might be nice to throw in some links. On that topic, const evaluation, anything burning to add here?
No, nothing burning. I was a bit busy with other things last week, although I should be more active this week. If we get to the end of nominated issues, I would like to talk a little about the post-drop evaluation, but it's not urgent, so.
Okay. FFI Unwind, the major update is, oh, sorry, Scott, did you want to add something?
I was just wondering if we want to do something about the const block RFC that's been up for a while without too much lately.
Oh, yeah, sorry. That's sort of reached a fixed point in terms of discussion. So I will sort of summarize the status quo. Scott, is that what you had in mind, or?
I was trying to remember what we were talking about around when we want to FCP things for that. It seemed in a pretty reasonable spot that maybe it would be appropriate to take it forward, but I was trying to remember if we said we wanted to get basic consensus in one of these meetings before we did that.
I feel like we've discussed it a number of times and nobody raised any like major concerns. I would feel comfortable starting the FCP, and then we can sort of revisit it in the next meeting when we have more people around or something, maybe. Or
cool. I think I assigned that to me. Do you want me to make a PFCP there?
yeah, definitely. And also maybe summarize any, like if you can summarize what was the key disagreements so that people are linked into the, or any, you know, notable developments along the way, that would be good.
Okay, I can do that.
Okay.
Sweet. Thanks, Scott.
FFI unwind. I think Kyle was doing some work towards finding, there's like a few minor edits and it's just want of time, hoping to have an RFC soon. One minor terminology thing, we settled after numerous back and forths. I think we settled on a term, plain old frames, taking off of plain old data from C++ for frames that don't have a pending destructor or catch unwind, sort of things that are inert was the phrase I was using before. Those are significant because they're the kind of things you can long jump over. One minor point that's being discussed is whether if you have a variable that would need a destructor, but it's been conditionally moved, and you happen to know that that move occurred somehow by program logic, can you still consider it a plain old frame or not? Like if the compiler doesn't know, but you do. And I don't know the answer to that question actually, because it kind of depends a little bit on LLVM, since we're going to flag it as potentially needing to run. So I think we're going to leave that. I don't know what the consensus was. I should look back whether to. I think Aman, you wanted to say that it still counts as a plain old frame. I feel a little less comfortable with that, and rather sort of say there were no destructors, full stop. But I don't know. It's probably a minor point, hopefully, though it's the kind of thing where I'm a little bit worried we ignore it and then we end up with some miscompilation. But so dentrate, no progress to my knowledge. Similarly, grammar, none of these other points. Maybe extraction set, probably not. Okay, let's get to the issues. P-high is the usual set. I don't think there's any major updates on these. At least I don't have any GitHub notifications. Nominated PRs. So this PR is applying the unsafe op in unsafe function lint, which we recently added to liballoc. No, I'm not going to add it to the paper unless there's a reason. I think it was, as far as I can tell, it was highlighted so we can take a look and kind of see what we have wrought and decide if we like it. I'm not sure if it's really blocked on us or not. It seems more like an implementation decision whether to do it, but for those of you who are interested, you could take a look. It's kind of what you expect. There's more unsafe blocks in the bodies of things. I did find it nice, I guess. One thing that was sort of interesting was, you know, cases like this where the actual unsafe operations are more highlighted, I guess, than they would have been before, where it's a bigger function. It is also worth noting that any automated rewrite, well, at least what we have, I don't know, you can sort of see also places where it was just added to cover the entire function, and it's not that illuminating in that case, as you might expect. All right. Does anyone want to make any comments on that?
I did look through a great deal of the code, and I thought that the overall balance of having many of them become more fine-grained suggests that we're going in the right direction. It also suggests to me that there may be further improvements we could make in terms of making unsafe, I don't want to say easier to use, but rather harder to misuse or easier to do at the granularity that you need to. But nonetheless, this seems like it's showing that this helps, at least to me.
Okay. I felt good about it, I think, also. All right. Shall I say that we approve of, to the extent that we have to, of landing this PR? I guess the only reason I would see to disapprove is we'd have to maybe undo it if we take away this lint in the end. But
I don't see any reason that like needs to approve or disapprove.
yeah,
Really?
I sort of agree with that as well. But to the I guess I will say we approve in spirit, though we don't think in any formal sense it's required.
Yeah, that makes good sense to me.
Okay. All right, next PR, stabilized track caller. There's a stabilization report for the track caller, which tells you when you unwrap that you get a better line number. Not many of you have checked your boxes here. You might want to, unless you have concerns. I don't, you can see in the report, I don't actually think there's any reason not to do this. Well, I guess that people can start to use it outside of libstandard. That's the main thing. So,
right. I think one big item that's worth calling attention to on this is that it is proposing stabilization of track caller and of the one specific bit of location that allows you to get access to what track caller saved. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it stabilizes anything beyond that. So I think that we have some flexibility to improve this in the future. One item that came up in particular, not in this discussion, but in another discussion elsewhere, somebody observed that instrumentation attributes don't always capture the full details of what function was called, and it's worth investigating whether that's true of track caller, like whether it passes the details of what trait you're in and what implementation you're in and so on. But that the nice thing is we're not stabilizing anything that prevents us from improving that in the future, improving the information that we track.
do we need to have lib sign off on this? Given that
I assume it's adding a public stable library type.
yeah.
Sounds like you probably should.
It seems like it. I think I remember DTOLNA flagging something like that on the tracking issue. I see there a reviewer here.
Certainly feels like the hardest part of this is what are we actually exposing library-wise.
There's a separate libs FTP. Okay, I didn't realize that, so never mind.
Okay.
Anyway, okay. Well, I'm gonna leave it because I mostly wanted to call attention and want to make sure we get to everything. But report error when casting a C-like enum implementing drop. Okay. Yes. So let's pull up the issue, but you can cast C-like enums to an integer if it currently it's considered a move. I don't know what it looks like. No drops occur presently if you do this, which seems weird. It's kind of like an into or something. And we never changed that a long time ago. And I think this is trying to make it into an error, which I think is what we thought would be best. so that you basically changing the definition of C-like to be it cannot implement drop. It looks like we did a create or run. There was no impact. It's up to us to decide if we want to approve or not approve. And do we need an FCP, I guess. I personally feel like we're dodging a bullet here and we should go forward. But
do we have anything that ever said what this was supposed to do?
not really. I mean, this is one of those very old behaviors that snuck into 1.0 with the kind of, oh, well, it's sort of nice if we had a different way, but who has time to design? It works okay. And I don't think anyone really put a lot of thought into this. Certainly it was meant, I can tell you from memory, this was meant to cover the case of, I took a C enum, I converted it to Rust, and I want to get an integer out of it. Like, not meant for any more general purpose than that.
Yeah, I suppose the whole original name of C-like enum is, well, it doesn't have drop because that's not very C-like.
Right. It's kind of suggestive.
And in general, if we can get away with saying you can't just as the thing and you have to actually do something non-trivial to convert it instead, then that seems like a net improvement. We're not saying you can't do it. We're saying you can't do it with as.
Yeah, although we don't offer.
Yeah, part of me says that if you have a C-like enum, it's probably because you wanted to be able to as it as something.
Right, but in which case, don't write drop.
Yeah,
I mean, the auto generation tools aren't going to have an input drop for that. So yeah, someone made a decision there and then implementing it.
I don't know what the rules are around C-like and privacy as an aside. Like, is there some implicit semver break it?
Oh, that's a good point.
If you don't happen to have data in your enum, I guess if it's
that's what non-exhaustive is for, though.
Right, and we don't really offer. Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say your enum has to be public, I guess, so you already can't add variants at least.
Yeah, I guess I'm at, if someone really did want to see like enum with drop, then they probably did that because they wanted as, but a see like enum with drop is kind of weird anyway, so I'm good to just say, no, don't do this.
The obvious workaround would be to make a struct with drop that wraps your C like enum.
Yeah.
It's kind of a drag, but it makes it sort of explicit what's happening.
I think I'm fine with this, but I'm also not the most opposed to technically backwards incompatible changes on the team. So
the other option would be that we don't make it a move. Like, I'm not sure exactly why converting it to an integer is a move anyway. Could be a borrowed theory.
I mean,
well, it's a copy for copy things, which implies that it's a move for non-copy things, and it's dropped, so it's non-copy.
No, it doesn't. Yeah, but it doesn't like have to be a move. I mean, it's only reading discriminant in reality, right? It doesn't disturb the existing structure. So in other words, I think the fact that the current behavior in mirror seems very wrong is what I'm getting at. And I think a correct fix is probably either to forbid it or to run the destructor at some point or another. But the idea
running the destructor seems a little too magic.
What?
Go on, Felix.
I wanted to ask because someone, I think it was Scott, said, well, you know, it's copy for non-copy things, or copy for copy things and move for non-copy things. But I was trying to think, is there any other case where as works on non-copy things? I can't recall any other precedent to point to for what to do here.
Box, but like you can as a box of food to a box of din something, but that doesn't.
Can you as a box to a usize? No, you have to go through pointer first.
I don't know.
Oh, can you as a box to a pointer?
I think you have to ask the box for its pointer in order to do that, because you need to know whether you're leaking the box or not.
Right.
I don't remember if
That
you
would make
can.
sense.
Well,
Which
makes
sounds
sense.
like
I
precedent for you can't as on something with drop because you have to decide if you're dropping it or not.
right, exactly. I think if we can get away with just banning this and it won't break anybody's code, then we should do so. We may want to try to, I mean, do we need to go through a period of deprecation first to make sure people can yell at us if we didn't catch their issue?
You think,
Maybe beta's enough.
given the rules, so that's sort of a compiler team technically concerned. The rules the compiler team has would permit, like a clean creator run allows us to get away with, we'll run it on nightly and see what happens. Like a good practice is start of cycle, for example, to give as much time for people to raise reports.
So would
Okay.
the assumption be that if this got to stable and day 3 of a stable release, somebody says, hey, this broke my code and I don't test against nightly, then we would revert?
Probably not. We would say, I mean, it depends who that person is. But if it's someone who's sort of has a large impact on the ecosystem, then they're probably testing nightly. Yeah. I don't think we would do a stable backboard in that case. We can, like I said, I think that's more, compiler team is usually meant there like to manage these things, although I think we have input to some extent. If we want to say we should do a transition deprecation period, that's certainly possible. It's not hard.
I mean, just for the sake of getting people to notice, it seems worth having like a warn by default lint or even an error by default lint for one release and then turning it into a hard error.
Yeah,
Just
it's
so
always
that
always kinder to warn first. So,
right, yeah. I mean, even if it's an error by default lint, you can then have a means of working around it in stable. It gives us a way of backing it out.
I think that's reasonable. So
I think I like Nico's point that maybe we say as Lang, hey, we consider this a bug fix, that the intent was that you shouldn't have been able to do this because it's not C-like, and if compiler rules say that they're allowed to do changes like this, that's okay.
So what did I just do? Yeah, right. I think it's good for us to just delineate our own decision-making power here. But I think we can leave a comment that says, so consider a bug fix. Might prefer a warning period for one release. And
it probably wouldn't be hard to implement that either.
We should update the reference. Yeah, there's actually no reason not to do a warning period. It's very easy to do. The only reason not to is that we're not that great at making them errors, but we should get better at that. That's kind of a WG prioritization. That was one of the mission statements that we haven't really followed up on, I think, was that they were supposed to help us keep track of that calendar and advance it. All right, let's move on, because I want to get, there's a lot of stuff here. Raw ref macros nominated. Is it just to call attention to FCP? Probably. Felix, Scott, be aware that we're trying to add these raw ref mute macros. We've discussed it a few times. Maybe you want to check your boxes. Must use trait. I don't know if there's anything new on this topic. I feel like we talked about this. Yeah, nothing new in the PR. Don't remember what we said the last time we talked about must use. But it might be.
I think our general consensus seemed to be a trait kind of seems to align well with the way we want to propagate this, but we're not sure if that's how we want to actually integrate it into the type system or not going forward. So we're not sure seemed to be where we left it.
Right. I think that's right. I want to say, what was I supposed to green light? Okay. Well, I did also follow up, but I think I remember not getting much, not getting much take up from like somebody who wants to try to drive experimentation forward. Okay. I don't know. I'm going to unnominate it. it doesn't seem like there's any urgent need for us to discuss it. I know a lot of my urgency comes from the async side of things, but this is the type with no type parameters. There's nothing new to add there, I don't think. We were considering maybe we should discuss it in a meeting, but no new comments. Okay. Let's leave it and move to nominated issues. Oops.
Before we move off of this stuff, I did want to double check about the raw ref macros thing. Does that also need, I just saw Aesthetic Morse mentioned 2 weeks ago that it needs sign off from tlibs for the precise syntax implementation. Does that wait until stabilization? Do we need to rope them in now or next?
That's a good point. I suppose it does. I didn't think of it because and raw was kind of purely laying, but I don't know. Why don't we ask them?
Okay.
Unstable libs things, assuming it's unstable, unstable libs thing often go in with no libs FCP.
Yeah, but we should
But we should at least have a, hey, hopefully one of you looked at this and didn't go, man, this is terrible.
Yeah, we should give them a heads up and
Also, I think top level macros have a bit more concerns than like your average random helper method.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's our import hygiene breakingness for top level macros?
I don't know. I think they're generally like deprioritized relative to other macros, but there might be some edge-ish cases.
So same as items, not like trait methods?
I think that's right.
Generally? Okay.
So nominated issues, async execution can get lost. This is all about option of must use. I'm gonna unnominate it again because I don't know that we need to keep talking about this until some development occurs. Stabilize alloc error handler. Looks like this finished final comment period. I don't know if there's any reason for it to still be nominated, but I don't think so. There's some discussion, but Ralph added it, I guess. Never mind. Let's see. This proposal is accepted, but I guess there are 2 competing alternatives. Is anyone familiar with this? I'm not.
What was the number on that one?
This is issue 66740. And the competing alternative is 66741.
These are competing alternatives
Well,
because they were both FCP'd and most of us checked our boxes on both.
it seems like they're both motivated by the same problem and they independently solve the same problem. That's what Ralph says here.
Interesting. It also looks like the same person proposed both. I'm wondering if we, unless I'm misreading.
It says Simone sort of agrees with this framing.
Okay.
Did not expect them both to enter. Sounds like I don't know.
They list themselves as alternatives, according to Simone. And
Right.
I think Simone expected someone to along the line to say, oh, we should choose this one, not this one. But
Okay. So is there anyone who has enough context to present on what the difference is? Like I'm really not, I find this is definitely a case where I was like, okay, I trust other people. So.
I'm happy to look in. I can't provide context now, but you can assign me as an action item to establish context for next meeting.
All right.
Reading the two, I definitely want to understand why it is that these are duplicative, because it seems like one is saying, let's stabilize the ability to specify one, and the other is saying, let's specify the behavior when you don't specify one. And those seem like they're compatible. One is saying, let's panic if you don't have one. One is saying, here's how you can stably specify one. So I would really like to understand why these are not something we both want to do.
I think the thing is, it's not that they're in conflict, but rather that the end goal can be achieved with either in terms of what, I guess, the people were motivated by them.
I think that's true insofar as people want the ability to handle this in some reasonable way, and one way was to default to panic, and then it's possible for people to override a panic handler, and another way is to let people actually specify an allocator error handler. So it's true that you only need one to solve the problem that people had, which was handling no standard with allocation, but that doesn't mean we only want one. That just means we only require one.
Yeah. So I guess it's like then all right, now that's enough context to sort of remember what's going on here, I guess. But I think the objection is then, can we come up with some motivation that goes like, we should list more motivation than to enable people to write things on standard, I guess. I don't know. It seems like the motivation is not that hard to imagine, that one wishes a different recovery. I feel like I would be okay with, indeed, if they had both been in one FCP, I would have probably still accepted it. But so yeah, one option is just to do them both, I guess. It seemed like Amanu felt we should only stabilize one. If you only were to pick one, it would presumably be defaulting to panic or something, because that's sort of the...
That's the smaller surface area, yes. It seems like the minimal solution, and it seems like codifying what we more or less already should be doing. So it certainly seems like the more conservative change.
Yep. Maybe Felix, do you want to leave a comment saying, if we were going to pick one, that would be the more conservative, it seems like the more conservative one, and we should start with that. But, you know, they're not incompatible and we could do both.
I'm happy to, I'll write that down, sure.
Okay. I should really be taking better minutes. I've been just getting very lazy. It's hard to remember these things then the next week. What we said. Let me just copy and paste something in here. The next issue was the config version, where we had some discussion, but Ditolne, I think I nominated it because of Ditolne's comment. Josh, do you want to like start talking about that while I write this down? Are you familiar with what I'm doing?
So there was a proposal some time ago for two new config items, config version and config accessible. Sorry, I'm giving the broader context as opposed to just Ditolne's comment. Do you want me to focus on Ditolne's comment?
I guess the broader context seems okay if it's quick.
It's quick. So config version and config accessible. There is a desire to have those so that you can reference things that may or may not exist and use that conditionally to decide whether you should implement something. If we'd had it back in the day, people would have used it for things like, do I have U128 so I can implement traits for it? there was some concern expressed in previous Lang team meetings about stabilizing version before we have accessible, because that may then lead to lots of version checks throughout the ecosystem. There was an additional concern that Ditolne raised, which was that the way that we decided to resolve version handling for nightly, such that 150 nightly will report itself as config version 149, but not config version 150. We decided on that because 150 is not exactly a complete, 150 nightly is not a complete 150. It would not necessarily have all the features of what stable 150 would have, whereas beta theoretically does. They might potentially get turned off if there's some critical issue, but there won't be new ones added. So that was the motivation we had in that previous meeting. The statement from Ditolne was that that would also prevent people from testing on nightly and testing the same code they'd like to use on stable, because they can't just add a config version for 150 in order to test a thing that's going to be released in 150. They would instead have to add a config version 150 or nightly, or they'd have to otherwise somehow handle this. So I think that's worth at least discussing that use case and covering, is this the desired behavior? Do we want something else? I have thoughts on that, but I just finished spending a bunch of time talking on a summary, so somebody else should go first.
So Ditolne's workflow, if I understand, is the idea is feature gets stabilized at a certain date. Sometime after that, but before the next release, various libraries insert config versions that will start enabling that feature. Like presumably before this, they had some other form of versioning, but now they're going to config versions because they're testing only stable things. Then they can keep testing nightly builds, and now we'll find out if indeed they're like stabilized. Some problem starts to occur with the soon to be stable behavior. And if that makes sense to me, I guess I'm very wary to, I don't know, like I think library consumers like Ditolne have a lot of sway here. So if he feels really strongly one way, we better have a strong argument why it's wrong. And I feel like our prior arguments weren't that strong.
So for my part, I do think this is a case study in why version requirements are not ideal, and a case study in which I would personally love to reconsider the question of stabilizing feature names, insofar as if a particular feature has been stabilized in a given nightly release, then once that feature is stabilized, it'd be nice to say, do I have that feature, rather than am I this version? And I would expect a nightly compiler that has stabilized that version, or that's in nightly and therefore has that, to support a config feature this name. That seems preferable to me than playing with the semantic of, am I this full version or not? But it seems questionable to me to say you're 150 at the very beginning of a nightly cycle, when in reality you're going to grow additional features that will be part of 150, and previous nightlies in that same cycle will not have them. So I think it causes problems either way.
One other thing is that config accessible according to the thread is working.
Really?
It's what this comment says. Which I think the belief is that one would primarily be using config accessible for sort of new APIs that have been stabilized. But
certainly new APIs, though not necessarily new features.
Right. There might be some features that are not accessible via accessible.
Most like const eval extensions would be qualify as that. You wouldn't be able to use config accessible.
Right. There's a good example.
So, but those are good examples of, like, if you're on the nightly ecosystem, I guess what goes wrong is that you've updated for a newer nightly, but your consumer is using an older nightly, right?
Right.
And in principle, that should be addressed. Like, that is a problem, period. And in principle, well, I don't know that we have any proposals that have ever talked about that level of resolution in terms of being able to specify you're compatible with this version of Rusty. Normally, we would say we would do that to tie it to Rusty versions, I guess.
I would express a mild degree of skepticism regarding there was a pushback. Part of the pushback said, you know, people don't run old nightlies. I'm not necessarily saying, I mean, Detone specifically said, for instance, providing any more than accidental support for old nightlies is a lost cause. I would push back slightly on that, in that people who are using nightly do have a tendency to pick a version, pin that version, and then build with that version until they pick, test, and pin a newer version. And if the version you happen to pick is a week into the 150 nightly, and that version declares itself as 150, and you leave that version pinned for 3 months or 6 months, you may experience breakage if some crate says, I want 150, and it expects a feature that came later in the same nightly cycle than when you pinned.
So, yeah, I agree with that. Of course, I mean, this seems like this has implications for if you're going to do pinning, you have to align it with releases. It's kind of
Which is not a terrible advice, honestly, but it's not something people have had to do in the past.
So I feel like the triage meeting isn't the right place for us to hash this out too much. I'm wondering whether like I don't know who is the major advocate for this feature in our team. Is it you, Josh?
I'm personally an advocate for config accessible. I honestly am not all that excited about config version and could take it or leave it and would happily leave it.
Do we have any current advocates? Where did this, like Taylor maybe? Where did it come from initially? I basically want to put some people in a room to hash it out. I don't care. Is the result.
I believe it originated with Central, both config version and config accessible, and I heavily pushed for the availability of config accessible and was also an advocate for config feature of some kind. I was never an advocate for config version. I don't know who on the team currently is. That doesn't mean there isn't someone. We also don't have that much quorum today.
Yeah. All right, well, why don't we, I think at minimum, like I think a good way to think about this is what are the workflows that people can do? And it seems like Detolne's workflow is good, but it does have implications for pinning nightlies. The alternative workflow has implications that it's hard to, until the alternative workflow is that you basically don't make it, you don't release the new version of your crate until after the Rust release is what it comes down to, right? Or at least you,
or alternatively, you test using some -z option that says, pretend I'm the latest of my nightly. There was a proposal for that in the thread that you could have a -z assume full version or something.
Yeah, now I see the point of that. Okay. It seems to me like if I were going to resolve this, I would want to sort of collect the use cases and write up the constraints and be able to just tell, like, it sort of doesn't matter that much as long as we can tell, it does matter, but if we can tell people what they ought to be doing, and then if we know what people want to do, we pick the one that seems overall less onerous, or, you know, and for whom that has to be the basis of this decision. But I feel like it would require some time sitting down to write that stuff out. And I don't know who's going to do it. But maybe to start, we can post something about. Did we have, like, is there anything in the state today that we covered that is adding to the discussion? It seems like probably not adding overall, but at least we would want to extend our summary to include what Ditolne said and talk about nightlies and pinning.
I'd be in favor of delegate this to a small group of people who care and let them come back with a recommendation, as long as we give them the set of competing requirements that we're concerned about in terms of, like, people pinning nightlies versus people testing latest code.
Yeah, I'm in favor of it. I just don't know who that group is.
Yeah.
Okay. I will write some comment that tries to summarize what we said today. Uh, 2523. All right, we spent probably too long on that, but that's okay. What's next? Arc drop has a share. Okay, no new updates on these, it seems like. Allow loop is, what's the story with allow loop ecstatic? We're basically deciding whether to do an FCP.
Yeah, Ollie, this is sort of, if we're going to do if match, we should do loop at the same time, at roughly the same time, because it has basically the same list of concerns.
Yep.
Yeah, and
I stand
once
by this,
people
I
can
guess.
write if, they'll want to write loop.
So, assuming
I
there
have
was a evaluation report, I would check my box, barring any surprises within.
Likewise. Yeah, I'm the one. I was in favor of seeing this discussed, and I was in favor of the nomination, but I do think this is entirely sensible. It just needed actual discussion.
Okay. I will write the stabilization report in that case with a bit of input from Ollie, if I can get a hold of them. I think their background as well. So,
I have a slightly related point of order question for the triage meeting, by the way, and the time we have left. We have 3 of the 6 members of the team currently, I'm sorry, 4 of the 6 members of the team currently present. Do we know that this time is actually working for all 6 members and there's just a conflict today, or is there a standing issue or conflict that we didn't anticipate when we sent out the doodle? That may be a question for when this meeting is not being recorded, depending on the answer.
I don't know of any, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, it may be just this week is rough.
Sure.
I don't know if we've had a persistent lower.
Just wanted to make sure we're including everyone, that's all.
Yeah, we should.
I know there's some excitement going on around Taylor's area, for example, so.
Definitely a lot of things happening in the world, which could be related. All right, nominated RFCs, we got no real minutes, but there's only one. Destructured assignments. So this was discussed already some. I think some comments have been made, but I nominated it because
Looks like there was a Zillow thread too.
Ready. Yeah, we had some discussion about it. So I mostly wanted to call attention to it. I don't know that I know Josh posted some comments. Seems like Josh and Felix both posted some comments of things they wanted clarified. That seems okay to me. Anything we should say?
I'm sorry, what was the issue number?
It's RFC 2909. I'm not sure what to read.
Yes.
I'll just go. Because even though I know I want this, I have to admit that I guess I've been using Rust for long enough or something that those examples really read to me like introducing new variables. Just the way my eyes are trained.
Been really pondering something like a mutter at the beginning or something like that to try and give the usual warning of what's coming.
Yeah, it's tough. Part of me is like, some of these examples, I'm sitting here and go, well, I wouldn't want to see code like this, but it's not mine. And then make a Clippy lint or something to, you know, try to rule it out. I too would like something to highlight that it's mutations happening, but I have already been sort of instructed that it's not really consistent with where things happen elsewhere.
I mean, there's an equal sign. Like,
well, yeah, I tried to make that argument last week, but you know, somebody pointed out that mutable borrows happen on method calls. So.
No, but I'm saying, like.
Oh, you're saying there is the marker. That's something weird is happening.
Equals is an existing marker of mutation occurring to the left-hand side. But it's the pattern, I guess, the fact that we don't have, I don't know. The pattern is somehow throwing us off. Usually
we're back to bounded look ahead and unbounded look ahead again.
That might be a reasonable enough way to describe what where my misgiving lies. So I'm talking about humans bounded look ahead.
Yeah, it's certainly more complex than it used to be. I guess. Anyway, okay, we should discuss on that. I guess I don't think we need to go too much into it here.
I guess the point of the equals is you can have something that returns a place and then dereference that and put that on the left-hand side of an equal, and then it's still unbounded look ahead for an assignment. So.
Yeah, I'm not convinced by the unbounded look ahead argument, but I think there is some visual cue that I've built up now that says patterns are taking things apart and putting them into their own variables as opposed to updating existing variables. I might unlearn that if I had this feature. But
it does feel like probably one of those things where, yeah, you can do something really stupid with it, but the ones that anyone will actually use will be more reasonable. So
probably it might be a case of nightly, like this might be a case where it'd be nice to have nightly experimentation. Actually, it's an interesting case of it could be done in a procedural macro too, but I don't know. That would really, I feel like I have to use it for a while to learn how I'm going to feel about it. Anyway, we're out of time, so I'm going to call the meeting. We don't need to add any comments to this, I don't think, but people should leave comments with their thoughts if they have any. And thank you all for attending.
Bye.
Bye.